So after childbirth, again, you had the issue with hemorrhaging. What emotions and thoughts came to you or you had after you recognize what your situation was during that challenging time?
Well, there were several. To be very honest, I felt very broken after, and those were the exact words I used.
Yeah.
With my husband, I feel broken, and apparently, of course, he was a great source of comfort and protection. But what I also realized in that moment was, I'm from a very big Nigerian community, and
Yeah.
so many people were calling to congratulate us and
Yeah.
congratulate me. And I remember, one of the very first calls I took, my auntie said, "Well, how are you? How are you feeling?" And I started to tell her,
Right.
well, I almost died. And I remember my mom taking the phone, right, from me.
Yeah.
And she did that out of love and she did that out of protection. But what it
Yeah.
also said to me was, this is not something you tell people. This is not something you talk about.
Mhm.
This is not something and there's a whole cultural,
Yeah. Yeah.
background there, right? And
Yeah.
so it was this interesting juxtaposition of there's a cultural piece that is there. She did that out of love and out of protection for me. And also, what do we do with that? We talk a lot about
Yeah.
the horror of not surviving, but I don't think nearly enough attention is given to those who do and what that means to I was afraid sometimes. There was a whole set of things that happened afterwards that I had to sort of fumble through on my own
Yeah.
because it wasn't something that was talked about.
Yeah.
That happened in the past. We don't talk about that.
Right.
Right.
I think you're saying too, it's in the perhaps the Nigerian culture not to talk about the certain challenges and perhaps
Hmm.
bad experiences. However, you perhaps needed to talk about it, to express yourself, relationships with others who were there to comfort you. Mom was doing a good job, I imagine,
Hmm.
but
Of course.
her cultural lens was just causing her to want to protect you. But
Hmm.
again, while you're telling your stories, I'm trying to look at the experience of others, right, who
Hmm.
need the help, who might not have a mom there, who need to call a friend and openly talk about their situation. A near-death experience can cause postpartum depression
Right.
and a lot of psychological issues going forward, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I, it wasn't diagnosed, but it wasn't as though, we went home and everything
yeah,
was easy. There were many moments, and I didn't have the language or even the understanding of postpartum. It was sort of talked about depression, but culturally, no one really talked. No one's depressed. If you
right,
ever sad, that wasn't. I have a greater understanding of it now, but at the time I didn't. I was very afraid to even walk down the stairs with my son. Right? I constantly thought I would drop him, that something would
yeah,
happen, that there were all of these emotions that were happening, but there really wasn't anyone who was really well versed in what that was, or even knowing the signs to look for, or to be able to culturally
yeah.
talk to me about
Talk
it,
to
right?
you.
And
So
so
I think you're saying there's a gap there. I mean,
Mhm.
if
There is.
anyone who's supposed to be able to afford and get access to these things, you were in a position to do that. But
I
yet,
was.
it's just our living experiences and life and society doesn't address these challenges. Have you heard of a doula? I was reading
Yes.
recently and learned of the importance of a doula, who is someone that's there with after childbirth to comfort and help with perhaps breastfeeding.
Hmm.
I remember my wife's experience. Baby would not sleep during the nights, would not take the milk as they should. It's just a challenge. So how important it is to get that type of help um, for moms after
It's
childbirth.
it's so important. And again, this is where culturally, at least at the time, right? This was 12 years ago. And so I
Yeah,
think we're talking about it a lot more now.
yeah,
Women's health issues are getting more attention now.
yeah,
But at the time, doulas were considered to be something that rich white women did.
yeah.
That's what they were the ones that did it. I remember going to a class that was hosted by a doula,
Hmm.
and I was the only Black woman in the class. And I thought, I don't know what these, I just, it felt so it felt so foreign, and maybe like I was doing something that was unnecessary. And
Yeah.
besides, my mother was with me. She was a trained midwife.
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, I already have someone who's going to be acting like my doula," but
Yeah.
that's a really unfair position even to put my mom in, because her
Yeah.
job at that moment is really to be my mother,
Yeah.
and that's different than the job that a doula would be playing. And
Right.
so it's something that I think, and a lot of us are beginning to advocate for, is how do we make doulas accessible, especially because the research does show that doulas can be very effective at
Yeah.
reducing mortality, for both mother and also for child as well.
Your mom, I can probe a little. Your mom was
Mm.
with you. Your mom has a Nigerian background. You know, was there any kind of a traditional practice, traditional health beliefs and stuff that she wanted you to do and carry out during that time?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that are pretty customary. I mean, one is, my mom didn't live in New York at the time, so
Yeah.
once she heard baby was coming, she was on a plane. I think at that point she was even somehow she was able to bring soup. I don't know how she did that or who let her do that, but she
Well,
had
if she
some
can't bring the
soup.
seasoning and certain items, she cooked it and
Right.
carried it, right? Very smart.
And then also we have this tradition that, once the mom and baby come home, that somebody will stay with the family,
Yeah.
with the family for some time. Now that's interesting because my husband is not Nigerian, right?
Okay.
So multiple cultures are coming
Yeah.
together, right?
Yeah.
And
I imagine.
what is ultimately best. But those are some of them.
Yeah.
The
So soup,
preparation,
certain soup
food,
with certain ingredients, and
right?
the presence of
The
mom
present,
with you. Yeah, those are
exactly.
good practices that are helpful. I want to transition into your role as a an executive, as a founder of a company, and how you advocate. However, as you talk about your mom being a midwife, what do you think about midwives and birthing outside of a hospital? This is picking up now in our society. However, because we've had renowned athletes and others who have died during childbirth, and it's becoming a challenge in that individuals are looking for alternatives outside of going to a hospital setting. What's your perspective on midwives and birthing outside of the hospital? I just wanted to touch on that before we go forward.
I think that if the current status quo is ineffective at
Yeah,
ensuring that we walk through this very sacred path alive
yeah,
and unscarred and healthy, then other alternatives should be pursued and should be pursued aggressively. The research shows that doulas, midwives, are very effective in
yeah,
ensuring that mom is healthy, baby is healthy. And it is unfortunate that for some time the medical establishment has sort of resisted,
yeah,
the incorporation and encouraging mothers to pursue other means. There was a very Abby Phillips, who many
yes,
of us
yeah,
on CNN, et cetera.
yeah,
She ultimately had a home birth, and
right,
she had a doula, she had a midwife, and also after experiencing feeling dismissed. And this is someone who has access to the quote unquote best hospitals,
yeah.
but still did not feel like the needs were being met, and was able to successfully deliver at home with a midwife and with a doula and with her mom, by her side. So I think we should absolutely pursue
Yeah.
alternatives that will lead to better results.
Yes, thank you for saying that. How were your experiences after your first child? You felt like you were better prepared, and briefly, yeah,
Better prepared. Well, it depends on better prepared for what. Well,
yeah,
here's what I would say. So I have two children. And I had my second child almost a year afterwards, and because of the experience with my
hmm,
first child, I knew that we wanted more children, but I wasn't very excited to potentially go through a similar experience again. But I was prepared, and it was also important to me um to try to do them in close proximity, because the longer I waited, I was concerned that the bigger my fear would grow,
Yeah.
right? And so it was important for me to do that. I will say to you though that one of the things I am most grateful for with Dr. Comrie is that, so many of us in the attempt to prepare ourselves, we do have this knowledge of all the terrible things that could happen.
Yeah.
With my first child, I did not have that. And I will say that in Dr. Comrie's hands, that was a gift that many of us are not afforded, because I was allowed to enjoy being pregnant. I
Yeah.
did not spend 9 months being afraid of what could happen.
Yeah.
And at no point did she take that joy from me by telling me of all the ways that things could go wrong. She
Yeah.
knew those things and
Yeah.
she was prepared for them. And I think that is one of the greatest losses that so many Black women experience, is that we
Yeah.
have to go into it now knowing of all the ways that we might not make it in the end.
Yeah.
And then with the second birth, I did know,
Yeah.
right? And so that experience did feel very different, because now I was very much aware of the way things could play out. So much so that when Dr. Comrie told me that she had a conflict, and that, her, one of her, the doctors that she had trained would be the person there, I literally
Yeah.
got on my knee
Yeah.
and I begged her and I said, "You have to be there." And
Yeah.
then she promised, right? So
Yeah.
that's the difference.
Yeah. It's a challenge. Each experience is different. Each experience is different, and all this knowledge can cause fear. But thank God for providers
Yes.
and for those who take care of moms like you.
Thanks for listening to Cultivating Health Equity Stories. Remember, our mission is to amplify voices, challenge norms, and inspire change. Go to cultivatehealthequity.com, sign up on our email list, subscribe for future episodes, and find the resources mentioned in the show notes. Until next time.